Hey folks, this is Rick Barron with Lincoln Vlogs, and today I wanted to uh, promote one of my books that I have out on Amazon Kindle, and it's called Destiny and Fate. It is actually volume two of my first book, Too Predictable, in which I wrote about the parallel lives of President Bill Clinton and President Barack Obama. My book here has to deal with the parallel lives of John Kennedy and Donald Trump. So it's a very timely book. As I said, available on Amazon and Kindle as both an ebook and a paperback. I'll post the covers of both books to provide some context. But what I want to read to you today is Chapter 1, Part 1. This has to do with the patriarchs, the parents, the fathers, if you will, of our two subjects, John Kennedy and Donald Trump. So allow me to begin. We are constructed of a combination of materials and resources from day one. Therefore, the reason for a review of our characters' early years and environmental influences is to allow the author and reader to better understand the reasoning and decision-making skills that are articulated by the subjects of these books. These characters did not just fall out of the sky. Actually, they did. However, from the criticisms leveled against one of the subjects in Volume 2, one would think that in fact they dropped on their heads. Now the reader will have the opportunity to compare the two subject sets and hopefully better understand the why factors. Both characters in each volume were also heavily influenced by timing and the mood of the country regarding their respective presence during those numerological and generational shifts. I call it the drop zone. As demonstrated in Too Predictable Volume 1, President Bill Clinton and Barack Obama were clearly designed by circumstances beyond their control until at least their early teens. They both lacked the structural family foundations that would have normally bound them to a different path. And as a result, they were forced out into the world with half-empty luggage. They lack sufficient materials essential to completing their basic structures. The larger argument is that they sought fulfillment for those deficiencies in big government. The patriarchal figure was non-existent, and therefore they lack sincerity. Let's compare the facts. Both Donald Trump and John Kennedy had patriarchs. They were not only present, but they were omnipresent. Our other two subjects had none essentially. This is not to say that the latter were without some support systems, but that is still quite a distance from the stronger foundations of a two-parent family as well as generational roots. Granted, in those early days, parents had very distinct roles, and the father was not typically carting the children to soccer practice or karate lessons. Regardless, the male parent was present in a less physical way, and very influential as to the rules and their influence over them. Having no one fulfill that unnecessary balance, necessary in the sense that the writer believes that this balance is natural, and without it there is an equal and opposite imbalance, singular parents, no matter the Herculean efforts, can only accomplish so much. But I digress. The Kennedy clan was balanced, with very strongly willed parents. Yes, their older siblings were more disciplined than those children born subsequent, as is typical, and John Fitzgerald was in fact more disciplined than was given credit for because of his youthful appearance, smiles, and larger-than-life attitude. One could easily argue that this was the effect of the domestic foundations and privileges afforded him. He was naturally intelligent, quick-witted, thoughtful, worldly, and easily engaged. Let's understand that when an elder son of a patriarch is introduced into society or the world, there is a reputation that precedes him, that Barack and Bill were lacking. In the latter case, there may have been references to a deceased parent or the assumption that they never existed. Nonetheless, a clear distinction between the past would be obvious. Joseph Patrick Kennedy and Frederick Christ Trump were anything but invisible. Joseph Patrick Kennedy was born September 6, 1888. His day of birth, his life path, was a 6. Kennedy the Sr., with a life path of a 6, makes for an excellent foundation as a patriarch, as well as one who is committed to community service. 6s tend to be very grounded people, and given he was also a Virgo, the sun sign under which he was born, its natives are natural accountants. This predictably placed the young JPK in a bank. If, for example, he had been born on an 8 day, then his life path may have led him into bootlegging and ultimately big corporate banking. In Jacob Halbrun's review of author David Nassau's The Patriarch, JPK was everything I'm alluding to. However, apparently the first story dismissed in the book, according to the two writers, is that Joseph Sr. was never involved with bootlegging in his climb of the success ladder. The numbers alone could support that proposition, although I do not know the details since they are not particularly relevant here. Instead, he managed with what he had. It is his other attributes that caused him to excel. As is associated with the 6, there's typically someone related to this aspect who is in need of support. One could easily argue that Joseph Kennedy Jr. was that person until his death in 1944 during World War II. The patriarch had intentions of grooming his son for political office until that tragic moment. The burden then fell to John Kennedy, and this support from his father was there until the last vote was cast or purchased. The combined numbers of Kennedy Sr., which is the combination of month, day, and year of birth, that number results in a 4. It's a rather basic figure of the lower plane of life. However, Joseph managed to work both numbers to their fullest, and one could argue that he did so from the dark side of both numbers. He did learn the inner workings of the banking industry at an early age after college, and subsequently managed to turn a small investment into the beginnings of a financial entrepreneurship. Yes, his service 6 combined well with his structural 4 in the combination of building wealth and investments for himself and his clients. However, there is a cloud over some of his activities in the quest of building prosperity. The young Kennedy found himself a general manager's position at the Boston shipyards of Bethlehem Steel during World War I, where he propitiously met the Secretary of Navy at that time, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The early Roaring '20s saw Joseph Sr. involved with mergers and acquisitions of the burgeoning Hollywood studios of that time. In the late '20s, when the stock markets were relatively unregulated, which resulted in the financial crash of 1929, Kennedy found himself in the middle of the fray, reaping profits, while others were committing suicide from their losses. During Prohibition, his reputation was that of an importer of illegal liquor from overseas. Of course, this notoriety, to some extent, would make perfect sense for someone who was capable of making money from nothing to be involved with shipping and a high-demand product and service to his countrymen. Consequently, we see the building of relationships under his combined 4, as well as his life path. When Prohibition ended, he and the son of Roosevelt went to Europe to contract the whiskey distillers to import now legal alcohol for the nation as a whole. Additionally, he contracted with the Canadians for the same import distribution rights. Timing was his forte and fortune. Certainly his familial roots and heritage all contributed to his ability to move within these circles of his environment as the Kennedy reputation preceded him. As alluded to in the subsequent chapter, Senior Kennedy, as it relates to John Kennedy, was essentially absentee. The man was a player. Yes, he was intelligent. Yes, he was shrewd. However, his one kept him on the move. His family was not in want of anything as a result of his unique sense of markets, money, and opportunities. Whatever his family had amassed or accumulated through hard work and reputations, he grew that wealth and value exponentially. Ultimately, he could afford to acquire anything for his son Jack. Yes, this was an era when fortunes could be made or lost, but regulations and government oversight were also scarce. With regards to his in-depth number, which is a combined number of the month and his day of birth, his combined birth number, along with his net number, yields another layer. Okay, this is his in-depth number, which the final number came to an 11, and I demonstrate these formulas in the book. Deep inside the man was a master number 11, driving his ambitions as well as his relationships. Joseph Kennedy was affable, larger than life, and capable of relating to presidents, laborers, as well as mobsters. His hands were essentially in everyone's pockets. In 1932, he played a large financial role in the candidacy of Franklin Delano Roosevelt for president. These are some very large, powerful numbers, probably more than one could reasonably manage. And by all accounts, Joseph Kennedy Sr. managed all of them rather well in his own world. Given these worldly figures and their influences, people around him recognized that power and were taken with it. Humans operating at those levels have the energy and resources to do what they desire without the constraints of normal humans. It was not until subsequent years that the government was forced to step in and enforce its will and influence over some of the clandestine activities of people just like Kennedy Sr. At some point, perhaps a change in cycles for the outgoing Kennedy, he revealed some of those darker sides of his thoughts, not just his actions, and read head-on into some politically embarrassing missteps. This was not his forte, but he continued to press forward with his agenda, which appeared to be more self-serving. Perhaps given his loss of reputation and respect, some of these ill feelings carried over to his son Jack at the time of his bid for the presidency in 1960. A final blow came in late 1961 when the patriarch succumbed to a stroke, which sidelined him almost completely until his death in 1969. To say that the man lived a colorful and yet historical life is an understatement. However, there seemed to be an obvious shadow that remained over the Kennedys. Now on to Chapter 1, Part 2, in Frederick Christ Trump. He was born October 11th, 1905. And we begin with his day of birth, the 11, which is his life path number. Out of the gate, Mr. Trump Sr. is riding the emotional roller coaster of the 11. Always an emotional adjustment for any child, let alone adults. I have known many adults who've had difficulties managing their 11 because they never understood the true effects of a master number, let alone were blind to the meanings of numbers in our lives to begin with. The life path is the most serious, as all other numbers are subsequent to our path. Imagine stumbling through life with a blindfold over one's eyes. One could easily adapt through a trial and error fashion, assisted by environment, family, and all our senses. However, consider the foreknowledge. That is not to say that a blueprint has been provided that we must follow. Do not misinterpret the significance. There are too many other variables, so we consider these tools in which to develop our growth more effectively, more predictably, and finally a more balanced approach. This insight is also considered preventative medicine. The simple idea is to avoid situations and conditions that could trigger the negative effects of the particular number we have been given, and in turn expound on those attributes that advance ourselves as human beings. The advanced self should be our goal. What is our highest and best purpose? A roadmap, if you will, to the end game. Trump Sr. was off to the races, well into the sixth year of 1905, with the last quarter just beginning. In his combined birth numbers, we're able to see the next layer or strata of information, like the geologist would observe within a slice of the Earth's crust. The month to begin the final quarter of the year, or 10, October, of course the 11th day of birth, and finally the 6th year in a 9-year cycle. Typically, a 6 universal year represents adjustment and stability after the previous changes brought on by a 5-year. Even as a birth year, the number has the effect as to the mood of the world, the nation, and the family. These aspects all come to bear on the child. Thus, the combined number, birth number, representing the next layer of the foundation for Trump Sr. is the combined 9. Another huge number for early developing minds, because the 9 contains attributes of all of the other numbers. The young Trump Sr. has his hands full with a heavy master number and a larger-than-life influence of the 9. One can only imagine the intensity. In review of the early records, Trump Sr., much like his counterpart Joseph Kennedy, was out and about in life early on. His father passed when he was 13 years of age, and by working in construction trades, by 15 years of age, and working in construction trades, and by 21 he was building homes and on his way to developing an empire. His first two significant numbers account for his universal appeal. By constructing literally thousands upon thousands of apartments, low-income housing units, and even barracks for the military. A staggering 27,000 low-income housing units alone. These are truly rare, worldly, larger-than-life attributes that one can only ascribe to master and universal numbers, but I digress. As I tend to do in the construction of my layer cake, is to take this to the next level for further clarification of the materials utilized to construct this person. When you combine the day of birth and his combined birth number, the resulting number is the number 20. The irony of these numbers is telling. To be consistent, one can add together the 11 and the 9 to arrive at another significant figure, the 20. In the tarot, the 20 is the number of judgment. Clearly from the record, Trump Sr. was judged harshly by his critics. I'm not here to judge him one way or the other. I'm here merely to make the point that judgment was in no short order surrounding the life of Trump Sr. Given the size and scope of his projects, one could easily see what detractors would be attracted in a highly competitive city like New York. The 20 can also heavily relate to the underdog, which could very well explain his connection with low-income housing. It would be his son, Donald Trump, who chose Manhattan to make his mark. Similarly, Joseph Kennedy Sr. managed to find himself right in the middle of controversy as well as notoriety, given his age and family reputation. And finally, the in-depth number, which is the combination of the 3 previous numbers, and that resulting number is a 22. Okay, the final number we will consider here for our purposes is the combination of the life path, the combined numbers, and a net number to reveal the overall sense of the man's embodiment, to give us an in-depth figure. These are all significant figures, as it allows one to better understand that we are not necessarily all the same. One number never defines us. Therefore, we continually balance our understanding of who we are with the numbers assigned to us, as well as those surrounding our environment, which we will define at a later time. If you were to return to Joseph Kennedy Sr.'s numbers, you will see that his combined number was a 4, net number a 1, in-depth number was an 11. Yet another master number along with his combined 4 figure. However, Trump Sr.'s final in-depth number was a 22. The 22 is another master number of the material world. However, in this case, it was the material master. The 22 or 4 represents the foundation, 4 square, if you will, on the lower plane. This is an excellent figure for a builder or an empire builder. They inherently understand plans, blueprints of construction. They work within those parameters given, a series of numbers, if you will, that must conform to the plans. However, the material master elevates the path to a rarefied atmosphere. Trump Sr. was certainly all of that. The sheer volume of developments is staggering. In summary, our life path, or the day in which we were born, is the most significant. A combined number reveals additional attributes, followed by the net and in-depth figures. The other reason for combining each of these is to better understand how the numbers better explain the conflicts within us as well. Not all numbers are compatible. A birth number can be in direct conflict with the combined birth number, or a birth number could be the same as the combined number. If there is a conflict, one should be made aware of this discrepancy. No different than one should also be made aware of the duplicity. A discrepancy will result in contentious behavior, a rivalry, if you will, especially if one is aware of the dichotomy. A person born on a 1 day with combined figures of a 2 will undoubtedly struggle with independence and subservience. A contest between an 8 and a 7 may be much more pronounced. Arguably, this should not be so because each number has positive and negative qualities. However, the 7 and the 8 are higher vibrations, and so you see the need for further divination. Duplicate figures of birth and combined numbers is typically twice the effect. I met someone who was a 999, 9 month, 9 day, 9 year. He was every bit of those 9s times 3. The intensity is real, palpable, and therefore imperative that we understand who we are. What drives us to do certain things and not others? Why are we one way at this time and the exact opposite another time? What are our strengths and weaknesses, our positive and negative traits? When will we find our way on the true path? Why is our subconscious in conflict with our conscious mind? Are we capable of raising our life standards through a broader understanding of who we are? The answer to that is yes. Many people do not have the time to stop what they are doing and step out of their box. Most people have never made the choice between the red pill or the blue pill. Many have taken both, but I digress. Most humans are actually sheep who prefer to rely on the shepherd. With that reliance, there is typically a lack of accountability. As long as we have grass and the wolves are satisfied, the flock is content. These two patriarchs may not have been aware of their attributes, but certainly they attained larger-than-life results driven by the numbers. They may not have been aware of their exact place in history as their accomplishments unfolded. However, in this context, we are only speaking of the fathers. We have yet to define their respective sons and what drove them to the outer edges of greatness, leadership, as well as an obvious polarity. Destiny and fate are about to cross paths. Please read on. Thank you.